Ever laughed off a serious moment with a meme? Many young adults say it feels easier to joke online than to admit what's really going on inside. Some call this a kind of performative resilience, putting on strength so you don't look fragile, even though the feelings beneath never go away. By the end of this video, you'll not only understand which suppression patterns might show up in your life, but you'll also leave with one simple, research-backed habit you can test immediately. This quiz mixes psychology with today's digital realities, using reflection and humor to help you notice where you might be hiding emotions instead of processing them. And while suppression isn't new, the way it's showing up right now is harder to spot than ever, sometimes even when you're the one doing it. Why hiding feelings is a 2025 epidemic. Why has concealing emotions become such a widespread cultural pattern in 2025? It's because the entire digital environment we live in rewards one kind of expression while quietly discouraging another. On social media, light-hearted, polished, or entertaining posts get boosted, while raw honesty tends to sink to the bottom of feeds or vanish into silence. And this doesn't happen by chance. Algorithms amplify whatever drives engagement. People learn quickly that cheerful, memeable content earns likes and attention, while vulnerable posts often invite scroll pasts, judgment, or accusations of oversharing. Over time, the result is a subtle but powerful norm. Share positivity, package difficulty into humor, and keep heavier emotions hidden. This shift is not about individual weakness. It's about adaptation to a system. Recent surveys show why concern is rising. Nearly half of teenagers now say social platforms have a mostly negative impact on their peers, and about 45% admit they feel they spend far too much time on them. That doesn't point to a society that feels more connected. It shows that young adults in particular are living in constant negotiation between what they feel and what they are allowed to display online. Emotional suppression isn't new, but the scale of its stage is unprecedented. Where people once hid feelings inside families or workplaces, now they do it for audiences that can number in the millions. That change magnifies the suppression and blends it into the very rhythm of daily communication. Nearly 7 out of 10 active users admit they've dialed back or reshaped their emotions before posting, specifically to avoid looking negative. And here's the crucial detail. Many don't even notice they're doing it. When you've been raised inside digital culture, trimming away uncomfortable details just feels normal. A post about a rough day still gets brightened with emojis, softened with filters, or reframed as inspirational. What might have been direct vulnerability transforms into content. The performance becomes so practiced that even the person creating it often believes they're being open, when in reality, they've already hidden the harder parts of their experience. Psychologists warn that this constant masking can pile up in ways people don't expect. Repeatedly reshaping or minimizing emotions online doesn't eliminate them, it leaves them unprocessed. Over time, that accumulation doesn't just stay invisible. It shows up as numbness, fatigue, or sudden bursts of distress that seem to come out of nowhere. Behavioral research even shows that when students cut back on social media, they quickly report feeling less lonely and less depressed. Just a few weeks of using platforms less reshape their moods. That's how closely tied digital habits now are to mental well-being. It helps to picture what this looks like in daily life. Take a college student, Maya, who posts late-night memes about exhaustion, deadlines, or the chaos of student life. Her jokes are funny, they get shared, and they bring bursts of attention. On the surface, that seems like openness. But privately, she's told a friend she feels isolated and close to burnout. Her humor isn't fake, yet it doubles as cover. What feels like expressing herself is, at the same time, hiding the part of the story that hurts the most. This pattern is not rare. It describes how countless people communicate today. And unlike silence in the past, this new version of suppression doesn't look like holding back. It looks like flooding the space with content. It looks like reacting through GIFs, quotes, emojis, and jokes rather than unfiltered words. That disguise is why many people think they're emotionally available, when in fact they are filtering almost everything. The environment encourages it so strongly that distinguishing between genuine expression and protective performance has grown incredibly complicated. For many, this protective habit isn't about fooling others, it's survival. Sharing sadness too directly risks losing followers or being perceived as dramatic. Showing anger risks backlash. The solution people land on is to cover emotion with lighter tones. Struggles appear as motivational captions. Frustration gets layered under sarcastic tweets. or despair hides behind self-deprecating humor. It might make daily life feel smoother, but the price is that emotions often go unacknowledged. You can see the results across different areas of life. Students feel that friendships built mostly on trading memes and clips can lack depth. Workers remain silent about stress while still delivering productivity through endless chat apps. Even families default to group texts where a string of emojis stands in for conversations they might otherwise have in person. These small adjustments add up. The shared agreement is clear. Lighten it, polish it, make it easier to consume. That is why many researchers describe this not as isolated personal tendencies, but as a cultural level pattern. Emotional suppression once felt like a conscious choice. In today's digital environment, it often functions as the default. Communication itself is shaped to filter raw emotion, which makes the act of hiding less visible, and therefore harder to challenge. When individuals no longer realize they've suppressed something, the cycle becomes much harder to break. The point of the quiz you're about to take is not to diagnose you or define your identity. It exists to offer a mirror, to catch little clues about how this cultural pattern might be shaping you. The approach is playful because humor helps people look at difficult topics without shutting down, but the insights are serious. Suppression doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means you've adapted to an environment everyone around you is adapting to as well. Noticing which style of suppression shows up in your life is the first step toward creating even small openings for authenticity. Think for a moment about the last time you held back your real feelings. Did you soften them into something funny? Did you share a relatable post instead of admitting vulnerability? For many, especially online, humor has become the default disguise. And understanding how humor can both protect and obscure emotion is the next step in unpacking these patterns. The meme mask, humor as emotional armor. Do you ever notice how laughter sneaks in when emotions feel too heavy to put into words? Humor has become a common coping shortcut online. Often safer to post a joke than a raw confession. Humans have always leaned on laughter in hard moments. People chuckle at funerals, trade jokes in waiting rooms, or laugh with friends after a long day. But in the digital era, especially on platforms like TikTok and Instagram, humor isn't just an occasional release. It's evolved into a global reflex, a constant filter layered over daily life. A single video about being stressed or heartbroken can be copied, remixed, and echoed thousands of times. What once felt like a personal coping tool has become one of the main ways entire communities manage emotions. Take memes, for example. Instead of writing out, "I feel exhausted and disconnected," it's quicker to send an image of a cartoon collapsing with a caption like "me, emotionally." It signals distress, but in a package that feels lighter, safer, and instantly relatable. The exchange often stays on the surface, a laugh back, another meme in return. It's not that people don't care, but the shared script makes it easier to joke than to dive deeper. For a generation raised in digital spaces, humor feels like the default way to express struggle without overexposing vulnerability. This shortcut works because comedy is fast, portable, and emotionally contained. Writing out loneliness takes effort and may be met with silence or judgment. Reacting with irony or sarcasm takes seconds and usually guarantees engagement. Researchers studying online diffusion patterns note that not every emotion spreads the same way. While anger and anxiety are both negative emotions, anxiety posts tend to travel further. They prompt connection, support, or warnings in ways anger doesn't. That difference in how emotions spread shapes expression. People often mask anxiety, sadness, or fatigue in humor precisely because those coded messages move more smoothly across feeds. Quick check. When did you last use a meme instead of saying what you really felt? The challenge is that while the laugh gives temporary relief, it doesn't let deeper processing happen. Laughter can lower stress in the short term, but it doesn't provide the same regulatory benefit as crying, talking openly, or reflecting through writing. Psychologists often compare it to a release valve that lowers pressure for a moment, but doesn't empty what's inside. Over time, if jokes become the only outlet, the unprocessed feelings pile up. This is why therapists say clients who joke constantly in sessions may appear open, but often stall progress. The humor interrupts the very space that would allow authentic emotions to surface. Consider how dark humor, increasingly, dominates online communities. Videos about burnout, sarcastic takes on depression, or jokes about therapy fatigue are some of the most widely shared content today. That doesn't mean everyone laughing at this content is deeply unwell, but it does highlight humor's dual role. On one hand, It is a socially acceptable entry point into difficult topics. On the other, it can keep conversations shallow by prioritizing relatability over honesty. A meme about never sleeping before deadlines might build instant solidarity, but prevent anyone from admitting they're truly on the edge. Here's a scene that illustrates this tension. Picture a group of college friends trading jokes after a brutal exam week. One says they slept 3 hours total and lived on vending machine snacks. The room bursts into laughter as each person adds their own exaggerated confession. Everyone leaves feeling closer, yet one person may have been signaling a real health issue. The humor kept the moment light, but also discouraged them from breaking the pattern with honest words like, "I'm not okay." The mask protected them from vulnerability, but also blocked an opportunity for support. The paradox becomes sharper when you see how humor makes emotions both visible and invisible at the same time. Sending a sad meme technically reveals sadness, but the veneer of comedy shifts how it's received. The person on the other end may react with, "LOL same," and the disclosure is over. A connection forms around the laugh, but the weight of the actual sadness remains unacknowledged. This strange duality is why humor feels so safe, because it reveals without requiring too much. But it also explains why relying on it exclusively can leave someone feeling oddly unseen. Physiologically, this matters. When you cry or share openly, your nervous system gets a chance to reset. There's evidence of emotional release when people process feelings through words, movement, or tears. When you laugh instead, your body does get a short stress break. Cortisol levels dip temporarily, and there's a moment of relief. But if humor is the only outlet, the larger wave of emotion doesn't move through. Instead, it stays stored, resurfacing later as irritability, fatigue, or sudden overwhelm. It's not that laughter is harmful, it's that it isn't a substitute meal, only candy. Energy giving in the moment, but lacking the depth your system requires. And here's where balance comes in. Humor used occasionally to lighten difficult experiences is not only healthy, but protective. It helps prevent despair from completely swallowing someone, reminds them they're not alone, and can even provide resilience in shared settings. What research cautions is when that becomes the only channel. If every anxious thought, every moment of sadness, every frustration is instantly turned into content or sarcasm, there's little room left for genuine processing. The culture of social media amplifies the habit. Entire pages are devoted to anxious humor, depressive memes, or jokes about therapy. Algorithms notice they get high engagement, then serve them up more often. People scrolling late at night see endless feeds filled with humor about their struggles. Sharing a blunt confession might feel intimidating, but recycling a joke about the same feeling seems effortless and safe. Thus, the cycle feeds itself. Humor circulates, honest emotion gets sidelined, and the reflex grows stronger. This isn't a call to stop joking. Laughter is built into human survival. It provides a buffer in tragedy and a way to connect quickly. The important question is whether humor is being used alongside other emotional outlets or instead of them. If humor is your only route for expressing pain, you may be muting important signals your body and mind are trying to send you. And those signals don't disappear. Left unheard, they often reappear in unexpected ways. Mini explosions of irritability, constant fatigue, or drifting disconnection from yourself and others. So here's the takeaway. Humor is not the enemy. Use it, share it, lean on it. But notice when it becomes the only costume your sadness is allowed to wear. Joking through hurt is a normal reflex, but if you always laugh while hurting, it's worth asking what the unspoken part of you might need. Sometimes layering honesty beneath humor creates a stronger bond than the joke alone. Yet humor isn't the only way difficult feelings get masked. Sometimes the hiding doesn't come in the form of sarcasm or memes at all. Sometimes it shows up as endless pressure to stay upbeat, grateful, and high energy, even when life is falling apart. And that's where the story takes an even sharper turn. Toxic positivity, smiling through stress. Ever been told to just be grateful when life is unraveling? That phrase might sound supportive on the surface, but what it often does is deny or minimize the very emotions that most need acknowledgement. Psychologists describe this pattern as toxic positivity, the pressure to maintain constant optimism while shutting out feelings that don't fit the script. Commentary and expert pieces in 2024 to 25 emphasize that forced positivity can invalidate real suffering and actually heighten stress, because when emotions are blocked, they never get processed in ways the body needs. Encouragement and toxic positivity may look similar, but the difference lies in what each one allows. Encouragement makes space for the reality of hardship, and then gently leans on perspective. Toxic positivity, by contrast, leaves no such room. It rushes to erase difficulty and replace it with slogans. For anyone scrolling through feeds of polished affirmations and pastel-colored quotes about gratitude, there's a clear message. Joy is acceptable, wear it all the time. Sadness, anger, even fatigue, those don't belong. This approach suggests that negative emotions should be fixed or hidden rather than experienced and expressed, which prevents the adaptive processing that reduces stress. What makes this so costly is that positivity itself isn't harmful. Hope is powerful, gratitude is grounding. But when positivity is forced at the expense of authenticity, it pushes people into conflict with themselves. Picture someone grieving a loss being told, "At least they lived a long life," or an employee voicing frustration being met with, "Well, just look on the bright side. You have a stable job." These phrases come across as comforting, but actually carry denial. Instead of space for grief or fairness, there's a subtle demand to adjust feelings to fit cheerfulness. Outwardly, someone may nod, but inwardly their emotions get buried deeper, building a backlog of unaddressed pain. Research on emotional regulation shows what happens next at a physical level. When people suppress sadness, the nervous system doesn't calm down, it stores tension. Stress hormones like cortisol remain elevated, muscles stay tight, and sleep becomes disrupted. A forced smile may trick the outside world, but the body keeps carrying the weight. Studies consistently link suppression to higher cortisol and cardiovascular strain. In other words, the stay positive reflex doesn't erase distress, it traps it in the system. The rapid rise of wellness and self-help messaging in digital spaces has only accelerated that trap. Scroll through popular content, and you'll find endless encouragement to manifest abundance or choose joy. For someone already steady, those words may land well. For someone in grief, depression, or financial panic, they often land as invalidation. The suggestion is that unhappiness is a personal failure, that you're simply not thinking correctly. What began as encouragement shifts into pressure, creating an even wider gap between inner truth and outward performance. Consider one clear workplace example. Kara, a young professional, started a new job while grieving her grandmother's passing. Her team culture emphasized upbeat energy during video calls. Leaders closed every meeting with slogans about positivity, and colleagues showed up with unshakable smiles. On her end of the screen, Kara felt pressure not to disrupt the tone. She mirrored the cheer, typed enthusiastic emails, and logged off only to cry alone. Every stay positive message reinforced that there was no room for her reality, and instead of making her feel better, the disconnect left her more isolated. Over time, she described feeling almost invisible, her presence accepted, but her truth excluded. Stories like hers aren't rare. Teenagers struggling with loneliness may fill their feeds with motivational quotes, rather than risk stating how isolated they feel. Parents under stress may insist to friends that life is wonderful, worried they'd appear ungrateful otherwise. Even casual conversations get filtered. "I just need to keep positive" becomes the quick escape from admitting deeper struggle. These patterns teach people to keep their emotions tightly edited, presenting only the versions that look acceptably cheerful. The distinction that helps many people separate support from suppression is the contrast between compassionate optimism and toxic positivity. Compassionate optimism acknowledges difficulty, then builds confidence that better days are possible. It might sound like, "This is really hard, but I know you're not alone in it." This allows both pain and hope to exist side by side. Toxic positivity interrupts with instructions. "Don't be sad, just smile and be grateful." It refuses space for suffering at all. The first deepens connection, the second closes it off. Workplaces, friendships, and families often underestimate how damaging this subtle silencing can be. In teams equating energy with productivity, exhaustion is hidden under upbeat banter. In friend groups emphasizing only good vibes, frustrations never get airtime. The emotions don't vanish, they simply retreat underground, where they re-emerge later as tension, burnout, or sharp outbursts. What looks smooth on the surface often masks turbulence below. Online, the effect is compounded by algorithms. Posts radiating positivity tend to earn the most likes and shares, while vulnerable disclosures risk silence or quick platitudes. Someone saying, "I'm struggling this week," might be met with "stay strong," before the comment thread moves on. Over time, it teaches users which emotions are rewarded and which are quietly pushed back. The outcome? An internet of perpetual smiles that doesn't reflect the full spectrum of human experience. Physiology shows why this matters so much. After someone cries or shares honestly, their nervous system usually softens, breathing slows, the body releases tension, and they may even feel tired yet relieved. After forcing themselves to power through, with a smile, the body doesn't let go of stress, and the person often feels fatigued and wired at once. This is why expression promotes completion of emotions, while suppression traps them in loops. Denying feelings isn't strength. It's an endurance test that the body keeps paying for. Healing, then, is about integration. Allowing sadness, anger, joy, and fear to all take up space gives balance. Each feeling carries a signal. Sadness asks for comfort, anger asks for fairness, joy asks to be shared, fear asks for safety. Listening to only the acceptable ones cuts people off from their own internal guidance. Toxic positivity doesn't dissolve difficult feelings. It only muffles their messages until they press back more forcefully. The unseen cost of constant brightness is that many people lose access to what their emotions are trying to teach. From Zoom calls where everyone beams on camera, to family gatherings where no one admits stress, to social media reels where every caption sparkles. What often looks like resilience is simply performance. The real strength comes not from relentless cheer, but from making space for the emotions that hurt. That's why even a small adjustment changes the outcome. Instead of repeating slogans, practice responses that validate. Next time you feel pressured toward forced joy, or when someone tells you to just choose happiness, try this simple pivot. I hear you, but this is actually hard right now. That sentence doesn't reject hope. It keeps you honest, and it invites authentic connection where suppression would have built distance. Toxic positivity thrives on editing emotions into narrow shapes. But underneath those smiles are entire histories of survival, of training ourselves to make pain invisible. And for many people, that training didn't start on social media or in workplaces. It began much earlier, in families where difficult feelings were rarely allowed to exist. The family echo, hidden inheritance of suppression. For spiritual seekers and those on a healing path, recognizing inherited silence is often the first radical act of compassion. Emotional habits do not arise in isolation. They are often shaped by histories that flow through families in ways both visible and invisible. Families pass down more than traditions and appearances. They also pass down patterns of expression and suppression. These patterns are often legacies of survival, born from environments where voicing fear, grief, or vulnerability was too costly. What was once adaptation becomes habit, quietly echoing across generations. Researchers studying intergenerational trauma describe how emotional suppression is not only taught but absorbed. Transmission happens through modeling, unspoken rules, and even biology itself. Children learn by watching how their caregivers manage hardship, whether by pushing through silently or cutting off tender feelings before they surface. Over time, these practices become ingrained, so deeply woven into identity that they feel like personality rather than inheritance. Researchers describe this transmission as a multi-layered process, via learned parenting behaviors, family silence, and even epigenetic markers that subtly alter stress responses in descendants. This means someone may carry traces of ancestral survival strategies in both their psychology and biology, long after the original danger has passed. That inheritance often appears through the smallest, most everyday interactions. A child notices a parent stiffen when tears emerge and silently learns not to cry. A teenager observes their family avoiding conversations about grief and concludes that vulnerability is unsafe. By adulthood, those lessons no longer feel like lessons. They feel like instincts. Don't burden others. Stay composed. Handle it alone. These are not conscious rules, but embodied ones, lived without questioning. Many who grew up under these conditions only later realize how thoroughly silence was rehearsed and repeated across time. Instead of broad statistics, which often simplify the complexity of family experience, research consistently shows that descendants of those who survived upheaval, war, or systemic hardship report greater discomfort with naming emotions openly. Qualitative studies highlight this in striking ways. Grandchildren of displaced families describing unease when talking about sadness, or second-generation members of communities affected by violence struggling to show anger without guilt. These challenges are not about willpower or choice. They reflect patterns of avoidance that became normal within family systems, repeating long after the original crisis ended. Consider one example. Alina, a young woman, grew up in a household where her grandparents' painful history was barely discussed. Her parents, shaped by that silence, encouraged gratitude and perseverance, but avoided conversations about fear or anxiety. As a result, Alina internalized the rule that struggles should be managed privately. By the time she reached adulthood, opening up, even to close friends, felt nearly impossible. What freed her was learning about intergenerational trauma. She came to understand that her reluctance was not a personal flaw, but a family echo. The silence she grew up with was not about her. It was an inheritance created long before she was born. That insight gave her permission to challenge it gently, step by step. What Alina experienced is mirrored in countless families across cultures. Silence can be mistaken for personality or cultural style when, in reality, it reflects generations of protective choices. Elders who endured crises often believed that shielding emotions from the next generation was a form of love. Parents might refrain from showing fear to keep children from feeling unsafe. Grandparents might avoid speaking of violence to spare children from distress. And while these decisions once made sense as protection, they create confusion later. Descendants inherit rules that no longer match their present context. They may feel shame for emotions their environment taught them never to show, even though those emotions are universal and valid. Seeing suppression as inheritance rather than defect offers new relief. Instead of harsh self-criticism, why can't I just open up like others? A person can recognize their struggles as part of a larger story. When someone reframes silence as history echoing through them, their stance shifts from shame to compassion. The inner narrative changes. I'm not broken. I'm carrying lessons that once protected my family. That shift makes space for curiosity. What if some of those inherited rules no longer serve me today? The possibility of rewriting begins there. This reframing doesn't excuse harmful habits. It contextualizes them. Generational transmission explains why someone may lock away tears or stay distant when loved ones want connection. Understanding that these habits are learned shows that they can also be unlearned. Change may be gradual, perhaps as simple as answering honestly when someone asks how you're doing, or sharing vulnerability in a trusted space. But each act of openness interrupts a pattern. Families pass down silence, yet they can also pass down authenticity when one member dares to speak differently. A single person naming real feelings offers new models for children, siblings, and even parents. Generations shift not all at once, but in ripples. This is why many people in therapy feel enormous relief when they discover their avoidance is not solely theirs. Naming inherited silence often brings tears, not of despair, but of recognition. What felt like an isolated struggle becomes part of an understandable lineage. This insight transforms self-blame into perspective. Emotions long repressed were not wrong. They were silenced for survival. And survival strategies can be honored without being obeyed forever. In families marked by collective trauma, migration, poverty, conflict, the effects can shape not just individuals but entire communities. Groups often normalize composure, discouraging open grief or anger. Children raised in such settings learn that vulnerability is not just unsafe personally, but culturally. Recognizing this collective inheritance helps lessen isolation. It shows that one person's silence is also the silence of many. With that insight, compassion can extend outward, not only toward oneself, but back toward parents and grandparents who carried unbearable weight in their own time. And here lies a crucial question for anyone noticing these echoes. Do I still need to remain silent? Where older generations leaned on suppression to endure, today's contexts often provide safer spaces to voice emotions. Yet without interrupting the cycle, inherited patterns continue unchecked, even when no current danger requires them. Awareness becomes the entry point to choice. Once silence is recognized not as identity, but as training, it becomes possible to practice alternatives. Speaking small truths, asking for comfort, or even just admitting confusion instead of plastering on composure. Healing doesn't mean rejecting strength, it means broadening it. True resilience includes the capacity to feel deeply while enduring hardship, not excluding one in favor of the other. Vulnerability, when expressed safely, isn't weakness, it's an expanded form of survival. Inherited silence may whisper otherwise, but each step into honest expression begins reshaping the legacy. If the idea resonates, try asking a simple family history question. One small conversation can begin unwinding long-standing silence. Even modest acts like these alter the path forward, creating space where once there was only containment. The family echo carries history, but it need not dictate destiny. And once you start recognizing how inherited rules around emotion shape your reactions, another question arises. How do the bonds you formed early in life, the attachments that quietly shaped trust, closeness, and comfort, continue to steer your responses today? Attachment styles, the silent architect of suppression. Pulling closer when you're afraid of losing someone, or pulling away when you feel too exposed. These are not random habits. They are shaped by what psychologists call attachment styles, and they often act like silent blueprints for how we handle emotions. Attachment research links early caregiver responsiveness to adult patterns of suppression or expression, which helps explain why these scripts persist across generations. What you learned early on doesn't always fade with age. Instead, it shows up in the way you comfort, avoid, share, or stay silent, sometimes without realizing it. In simple terms, there are three main styles. A secure style usually grows from consistent care. These people are able to balance closeness with independence. They will admit when they are upset, but also trust that honesty will not end the relationship. An avoidant style often develops when closeness felt threatening, so emotions are kept under wraps. The person seems calm during conflict, but often by shutting feelings down. An anxious style grows when affection felt unpredictable, creating both a deep hunger for reassurance and fear of pushing others away. This person may hide anger or sadness to avoid rejection, even while reaching constantly for connection. Each style tends to approach suppression in a different way. Avoidant types often convince themselves that emotions are inconvenient. Silence feels safer than honesty. During an argument, they might withdraw into short replies, disappear for hours, or ghost entirely. The anxious style suppresses by editing feelings into something they hope will be accepted. They might post positive updates while quietly sitting with fear or sadness that never makes it into words. For securely attached people, emotions are not always comfortable, but they feel more manageable. Suppression is less dominant because they trust closeness will survive truth. If you want a quick self-check, here's one. When you're upset, do you tend to send a text instead of calling, just to keep distance? If so, that's a clue. Jot that down in your mind. Even these subtle choices can reveal your attachment pattern at work. Digital communication makes all of this easier to act out. For the avoidant, texting or messaging apps are almost designed for suppression. You can leave a message unread, delay a reply until the tension passes, or subtract yourself from the conversation altogether. Each move avoids risk while maintaining distance. For the anxious, the very same tools amplify stress. A seen notification with no reply can feel like abandonment. A late answer can trigger panic. Instead of expressing the depth of that fear, many anxious individuals post curated updates or flood conversations with lighter details, all while keeping their real needs hidden. Secure styles tend to navigate more smoothly, but even they feel the strain when nonverbal cues, like tone and eye contact, are stripped out of communication. Surveys now show that younger generations often turn to social media for mental health advice, reassurance, and a sense of belonging. While this does open support channels, it also intensifies the anxious avoidant tendencies already present. Posts that are humorous or polished gain more traction than raw honesty, teaching people, sometimes unconsciously, that suppression is safer. On the other end, easy tools like muting notifications or ghosting make it painless to retreat without ever addressing the emotions underneath. Suppression blends seamlessly into daily routines. Think of ghosting. For someone with avoidant leanings, disappearing feels like self-protection more than cruelty. Silence keeps them from conflict or vulnerability. For the anxious, ghosting can sometimes appear too, but often only after they have felt rejected already. Either way, the action cuts off the chance for honest communication. Both sides stay hidden, what was really feared, what was truly needed. And digital platforms make this decision feel as simple as tapping a screen. The outcomes in relationships can be predictable, almost like scripts playing out. An anxious partner texts repeatedly for reassurance. The avoidant, feeling suffocated, stops responding. The anxious partner senses rejection and ramps up their messages. The avoidant pulls back further, overwhelmed by the chase. Both end up suppressing. One hides fear behind constant contact, the other hides distress behind silence. What they both want, connection, becomes stuck behind strategies designed to avoid pain. Even outside romance, similar loops emerge. In friendships, Avoidant individuals may never admit when life feels overwhelming. They stay silent, masking need with strength that others praise. Anxious friends may bottle up frustration because they fear conflict will push people out of their lives. Outwardly, everything looks smooth, but both are hiding vital emotions that would make the relationships deeper if expressed openly. Over time, this silent editing becomes the norm, rarely questioned. Workspaces and group chats add more layers. Anxiously attached workers may over-polish their tone in team messages, hiding stress under a performance of cheerfulness. They strive to be seen as reliable, but rarely admit the strain they carry. Avoidant colleagues may limit interaction to one-word replies, keep cameras off, or skip calls altogether as a way of controlling exposure. These behaviors look harmless, but are often quiet strategies to avoid emotional closeness in professional settings. Suppression hides inside socially acceptable work habits. Look at small online actions again. Leaving a message in your inbox, knowing you won't answer because the topic feels heavy, can be a form of suppression. Crafting a cheerful post while skipping the truths that matter most is another. These gestures are easy, even normalized, yet each strengthens old attachment scripts. The more they repeat, the more invisible they become. Why is recognizing this useful? Because attachment scripts make confusing behavior understandable. You begin to see ghosting as a form of avoidance, not randomness. You see oversharing without depth as anxious reassurance seeking. These scripts explain why before change even begins. Awareness lets you stop blaming yourself for automatic patterns and start noticing choice points. Once identified, the grip loosens. An avoidant person who recognizes the pull towards silence might practice sending a short, honest message instead of vanishing. An anxious person who senses the flood of masked positivity can pause and admit one small truth, even if it feels uncomfortable. Securely attached people, too, benefit from noticing when technology challenges their balance. Suppression thrives when it stays unseen. Exposing it creates options. Digital communication adds tension to all of this because of what it removes. In person, tone of voice, eye contact, even breathing rhythms reassure us. Online, those signals vanish. A delay feels like a dismissal. A mute button feels like silence. With fewer cues, our attachment systems fill the gaps with old stories about abandonment, rejection, or rejection avoidance. Suppression steps in to defend us against fears that may not even apply in the moment. So when people say online interactions feel both connected and disconnected at once, attachment offers part of the explanation. Avoidant styles thrive on the control of texting, but miss the warmth of real-time reassurance. Anxious styles struggle with uncertainty. Every pause in response can balloon into panic. Even secure people, who normally feel steady, may find themselves thrown off by the quirks of digital life. And beneath it all, emotional suppression becomes the go-to solution for navigating interactions stripped of the cues our brains expect. The point here isn't to diagnose yourself with a label. It's to invite recognition of the silent patterns running underneath communication. Scripts once learned can feel like instinct, but recognizing them shows they were learned and can be relearned. Sending one more honest line, asking directly instead of scanning for hidden cues. These are small adjustments that remind you that authenticity is still possible, even online. And with this awareness, another question rises. If suppression shows up so clearly in our private and relational habits, what happens when nearly all connection is routed through screens at work? That's when emotional strain stops being a personal quirk and starts feeling like the structure of communication itself. Zoom numbness, remote work, and the digital wall. Why does a 30-minute video call feel more exhausting than a 2-hour conversation face-to-face? On the surface, it seems like it should be easier. You're at home, dressed comfortably, sipping coffee from your own mug. But the digital setting shifts more than the context. It reshapes how brains and bodies handle emotions. All the small nonverbal cues that normally steady us, tone changes, micro-expressions, pauses in body language, are blurred or stripped away. A screen gives the feeling of connection without supplying the ingredients that make connection emotionally sustainable. In live conversation, much of the work happens automatically. You pick up on how someone leans forward when listening, how their mouth tenses when they disagree, or how their voice softens when you share something delicate. These cues create feedback loops that signal safety and understanding. Video calls scramble them. Frames crop bodies. Delays disrupt rhythm. And you end up staring into a camera lens while checking your own reflection in a corner box. Instead of settling into the exchange, you monitor yourself. That self-awareness makes even ordinary interactions feel like performances, which adds an unseen emotional cost. Remote work surveys confirm what many describe in daily life. People working primarily through digital platforms report more anxiety, more stress, and sharper emotion regulation difficulties than those in hybrid or in-person settings. Recent studies of remote workers show higher loneliness and emotion regulation problems, and one cross-sectional study found that more days spent working remotely correlate with higher anxiety, mediated by those very regulation challenges. On top of that, a 2025 study revealed that more than half of remote workers could go entire weeks without leaving home, and nearly 1 in 5 reported doing so often. The absence of physical contact and movement compounds the mental strain, turning video fatigue into more than office slang. It's a measurable psychological and physical tiredness. Part of the drain comes from what vanishes in virtual meetings. In office life, once a tense conversation ended, people often reset through small gestures. Casual chatter walking back to a desk, a quick debrief in the hallway, or even inviting someone for a short break. Those side interactions served as pressure valves. In remote settings, meetings dissolve instantly when the leave button is clicked. 1 second you're nodding along, maybe even forcing composure, and the next you sit alone in silence with unprocessed tension. Many workers describe holding their feelings in during the call, only to cry or shut down moments afterward. The emotion was present all along. The format just provided no safe space for it to exist. This is where the suppression becomes automatic. Muting yourself isn't only about microphone control. It subtly becomes about muting frustration, fatigue, or unease. The frame of remote professionalism signals that you should stay composed no matter what's happening inside. Digital contexts often encourage muting and self-monitoring, which can lead to habitual suppression. Over days filled with back-to-back video calls, people report not knowing whether they feel upset, tired, or detached, only that everything blurs into a flat, heavy numbness. Researchers who examine emotion in mediated communication note how absence of nonverbal mirroring compounds stress. If you share an idea and get silence in a physical room, you can still read posture, eye movement, or facial shifts. Online, silence looks like a frozen face or broken connection. The brain reads uncertainty, not reassurance. Multiply that by dozens of small exchanges each day, and emotional residue builds into low-grade strain. Without consistent feedback, nervous systems fail to fully relax, leaving uncertainty and irritability. Over time, muting feelings appears easier than deciphering ambiguous cues. To test how this plays out in your own calls, try noticing where your attention goes. Next meeting, notice if you check your self-view box. Each glance is a reminder that you're monitoring yourself, not just communicating. That reflex drains far more than people realize, and is often where suppression quietly begins. For producers, this could be illustrated with a short on-camera contrast. 10 seconds showing comfort in an in-person chat versus the stiff smiles of a Zoom square. That quick shift helps viewers see rather than just hear the difference. The irony deepens when you compare expectations to reality. Remote work promised freedom. No commute, flexibility, more family time. While benefits remain, hidden costs surfaced just as powerfully. Surveys show over 2/3 of remote employees struggle to fully disconnect at the day's end. With email, chat platforms, and video apps always open, boundaries between work and rest disintegrate. Because performance in digital setups is judged mostly by visible responsiveness, whether you look engaged, smile, or reply promptly, workers feel compelled to project reliability. That often means smoothing over negative states, camouflage that mirrors the patterns of toxic positivity found elsewhere online. And it isn't deliberate posturing. Most employees aren't scheming to hide feelings. They simply adjust to the format. A steady voice and polite smile feel expected when a manager is on screen, even if inside they are exhausted. In person, a perceptive colleague might ask if something's wrong. On video, tiny signals vanish into pixelation, leaving no openings for care. Without that prompt, workers keep their masks up. A short story makes this visible. Picture someone logging into a company-wide meeting about cutbacks. Throughout the call, her posture is upright, her face calm, her comments encouraging. Everything outward suggests stability. But when the call ends and her screen darkens, she bursts into tears. That release waited until the moment privacy returned. Suppression during the meeting wasn't intentional. The digital wall made it feel compulsory. Accounts like this come up again and again from remote workers, and they illustrate how emotional numbing doesn't require effort. It often unfolds by default. The longer isolation lasts, the more intense these effects become. Studies show that in 2025, 56% of remote workers reported going more than a day without direct human contact. Extended time indoors without social resonance leaves people disconnected physically and emotionally. The result isn't only loneliness, but increased difficulty naming and regulating feelings. And that difficulty links strongly to higher reports of depression, anxiety, and stress. Each link reinforces the next. Lack of outside interaction feeds into less expression online, which in turn normalizes suppressed emotion. Organizations don't always register this, because output seems intact. Emails are answered, projects submitted, meetings run on time. Yet beneath steady metrics lies emotional debt. Suppression may not show immediately, but later it surfaces as burnout, absenteeism, or quiet resignations. The deeper cause often goes unnamed. Not just workload, but feelings that were never given air while the work piled high. Some scholars describe this as a new form of emotional labor. Beyond tasks, workers must regulate how they appear on camera, keeping expressions pleasant, eye contact steady, frustration invisible. This extra labor is rarely acknowledged because screens disguise it well. Add to it the expectation of constant availability, and fatigue compounds. Traditional rest breaks rarely counteract that kind of sustained strain, because the stress isn't only from tasks, it's from constant self-filtering. That distinction matters. Remote workers aren't weaker or less resilient than before. The structure of work itself shapes their suppression patterns. Digital channels encourage monitoring, muting, and hiding, not as a choice but as a side effect of the medium. The outcome varies, snappishness at home for some, vague emptiness for others. But the root is similar. Emotions struggle to find outlets in environments that don't support them. Framing. It this way replaces self-blame with structural understanding, a shift that often brings relief by showing the problem isn't individual failure. So far, these layers, family rules, attachment habits, cultural pressures, and remote work structures, have shown how suppression accumulates in hidden corners of everyday life. And just as digital platforms mute emotion in workplaces, another set of platforms offer what looks like endless emotional openness. Yet appearances can mislead, because you can share constantly and still stay unseen.